I'm an economist and I lean neoliberal. I lean toward open markets and free trade and letting the prices do their work. I don't like the Green New Deal because these people want to absolutely run our economy on behalf of their vision about how the future should look. And that terrifies me. I think taxes are, generally speaking, too high. I think regulation often does go over the top. And impedes our prosperity. I think the way forward has been shown by capitalism with a C, capitalism, not with a K, yeah, et cetera. Yeah. So, that makes me somewhat of a conservative. I write a lot about racial issues, and I'm cutting against the grain there. I think the country has lost its mind with this diversity and inclusion stuff. I'm not a big fan of affirmative action. I think reparations would be an absolute disaster for this country as well as for African Americans. We could talk about it. But so they call me a conservative, and I'm not fighting with them about it.
I'm Dave Rubin, and joining me today is a professor of economics at Brown University, a distinguished fellow of the American Economics Association, and a member of the U.S. Council on Foreign Relations, Glenn Loury. Welcome to the Rubin Report.
Thanks, Dave. Good to be with you.
How'd I do on the bio there? You have quite an extensive bio. I've got the whole thing here. I left off like 10 things that probably could have been the lead thing.
Well, I'm a member of the American Philosophical Society. I'm kind of proud of that because those are the guys that write, and the girls that write the big books. And I don't know why they included me in their number. I haven't written any big books, but the American Philosophical Society.
All right, there you go. So before we get to anything else, I want to ask you about that shirt, because you flashed me something right before we started, straight out of quarantine. Are you a free man in a free country right now?
Well, I have contracted, been treated for, and recovered from COVID-19, knock on wood, thank God. Yeah, I mean, my wife bought this shirt for me. It's kind of a play on the old hip hop rappers, straight out of Compton. So I'm straight out of quarantine and glad to be free at last.
Free at last. Well, actually, let's start there. I wasn't planning on doing too much kind of COVID-related stuff to you, but yeah. What do you make out of what has happened in the last year related to COVID and lockdowns? And then I think some of that will probably get us into some of the social issues of the day, which is what you're talking about a bit more.
Treacherous waters that you're inviting me into there, Dave. You can say the wrong thing and get canceled. I mean, a number of things.
Don't worry, nobody's been canceled because of me. Yeah.
I'm a social scientist, so the first thing I think about is what are the kinds of studies that people are going to do for years assessing what happened here. And there are many dimensions to it. There's the public health dimension to it. There was a pandemic, a pathogen, it spread in the population, people died. How effective were the various responses to that, shutdowns, masking, and stuff like that. But I think there are also political things here. For example, Donald Trump was hated by a lot of people. They hung this around his neck. Now, maybe he didn't handle it as well. I think I'll retract the maybe. He didn't handle it as well as he could have handled it, okay? On the other hand, here was an opportunity to sink Donald Trump, and I think a lot of people seized on it. So one of the interesting political questions to me is, how did the partisan character of American politics and the role the media plays in that affect the way that this thing was reported? But there are many, many dimensions to it. So the social pressure to conform, have you been vaccinated? And I'm for getting vaccinated. I've been vaccinated myself. I'm not against being vaccinated. Mm-hmm. Tucker Carlson, whom I follow from time to time, is on a tear about the masking stuff. And there is a real question there. I mean, the government is going to tell me what I have to put on my face. That works maybe in an absolute emergency situation, but when that becomes a way of life, you have to start asking the question about individual freedom and so on. So there's just many different pieces to it that I expect will be examined by serious people for years to come.
Yeah, was there anything that shocked you just about the general way, not the media, but just the way people sort of became so hyper-partisan about a virus, meaning that the mask has become sort of I'm a Democrat, the non-mask is I'm a Republican, something like that, sort of loosely speaking?
Well, that's one aspect of it. I mean, and some people were just absolutely terrified. I mean, they wouldn't come out of their houses. They had their groceries. They would wipe down everything with a cloth. And I thought, that was over the top. I thought that was excessive. But then how do we handle risk? Everybody is going to react to it differently. So what I was saying to my friends was, if you told me there was a 1 in 1,000 chance that I would die if I stepped from my front door, I might stay inside for a week, maybe 2 weeks. After that, I take my chances. You know what I mean? So, don't impose your risk preference on me. That was kind of my, and I'm like, it takes two to tango. So if I want to have a dinner party and the people don't want to show up, what can I do? But I did feel that there was a lot of over-the-top kind of overreaction to schools staying closed and whatnot. I'm not an expert on the data about school closings, but my colleague Emily Oster is at Brown University's economics department. Look her up. She had a piece in the New Yorker about this. She is an expert. She's a liberal. And they just tried to tear her apart because she said schools should open up. Because she said the data don't justify keeping the kids away from the classroom. You're doing more harm than you're doing good. The cure is worse than the disease. Where did I hear that before? Yeah. She said it, and they tried to take her head off. So, it was really a very interesting and very pathological situation from the way in which we made decisions as a society. I think politics, fear, panic, groupthink, these were all at play.
What do you consider yourself politically? Do you specifically say, I'm this, I'm that, I'm the other thing? Because when I'm listening to you, I sense a little bit of everything, which, by the way, that's probably how most people really are. We just get hung up on the label.
Okay. So I'm a registered independent. I don't tell people how I vote. What I was telling them during last year's presidential election is, of course I voted for Biden. What else would you expect me to say? And then I'd laugh and I'd say, I can't say anything else. You still don't know who I voted for if I tell you I voted for Biden, because if I voted for the other guy, I'd never tell you I voted for. But I'm a conservative. I think I just have to admit that now, on a number of different dimensions. I'm an economist and I lean neoliberal. I lean toward open markets and free trade and letting the prices do their work. I don't like the Green New Deal because these people want to absolutely run our economy on behalf of their vision about how the future should look. And that terrifies me. I think taxes are, generally speaking, too high. I think regulation often does go over the top and impedes our prosperity. I think the way forward has been shown by capitalism with a C, capitalism, not with a K, et cetera. So, that makes me somewhat of a conservative. I write a lot about racial issues, and I'm cutting against the grain there. I think the country has lost its mind with this diversity and inclusion stuff. I'm not a big fan of affirmative action. I think reparations would be an absolute disaster for this country as well as for African Americans. We could talk about it. But so they call me a conservative, and I'm not fighting with them about it.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think what you just said right there sums up what most of my audience probably is at some level, whether, some are maybe a little more libertarian or a little more traditionally conservative or whatever it is. But you just gave me a great sort of lead on everything else I want to talk about, because one of the things that I want to talk about is we hear this phrase systemic racism all the time. And I've heard you talk about this. I've read some of your stuff on this. In some ways, we're just not all talking about the same thing when we say the phrase systemic racism. So can you lay out maybe what you believe it to mean versus what you think some other people think it means?
Okay, in the simplest terms, here's what I think people are saying. They're saying back in the old days of the Civil Rights Movement, Civil Rights Act of 1964, Martin Luther King and all of that, the issue was racist treatment, unequal treatment of people, discrimination in housing and jobs and credit markets and so on. Blacks weren't treated the same. They were discriminated against. And the goal was equal treatment, which is why King is there saying, I have a dream that my kids will be judged by the content of their character. He doesn't want them discriminated against. He doesn't want them kept from voting because they're Black. He doesn't want them kept from shopping because they're Black. He wants them to be treated like anybody else. That's the old school thing. Systemic racism is declaring there to be a new day, because guess what? We pretty much have solved the discrimination problem. Not completely, but just about as completely as you could solve it in a free society. Every state has an equal employment opportunity commission. There's a ton of lawsuits that you can bring against your employer if you think you're not being treated fairly. God help a retailer if he actually does discriminate and charge a different price to a black customer, right? So,
which we would all be against, just to be very
we're
clear.
against that. That bit has been solved.
Yeah.
But the disparities are still there. Okay, blacks are overrepresented amongst the incarcerated, underrepresented amongst the students at a fancy college, have lower wealth holdings, et cetera, et cetera. So the disparities are there, but the account of the disparities that black person was discriminated against is no longer very effective as an explanation. So people are calling on larger forces, not personal one-on-one historical forces. I mean, here's an example. New Orleans floods. Black people on average live at lower level, sea level. So they get flooded worse. They get flooded worse because they're poor. They get flooded worse maybe because in the history of New Orleans, I don't know anything about it specifically, but this is just a hypothetical, they were discriminated against. And the high ground housing wasn't as easily, those neighborhoods weren't, the real estate agents didn't show them, whatever. They got worse jobs, et cetera. So they're on the low line. So then the flood comes and they discriminate. Now, some of us would think, that's an unfortunate act of nature. And then, just like if a pandemic comes and you got more comorbidities and pre-existing conditions, you're going to get a harder hit. But it's not an act of racism, a person might say. But the systemic racism, people want to say, oh, no. It is an act of racism. You see that disparity. The history of race in America is what has made that disparity happen. Then they have their story. In this case, the blacks are in the low-lying neighborhoods in New Orleans because of discrimination in the past and racism. And so that's their story. Mass incarceration is racist. Why? Because, the drug laws are what they are, and they wouldn't be what they are if the people who were being locked up were mostly white people and they have their accounts. There are not enough blacks at Caltech. Why? Because of systemic racism in the education system and so on. So it's an effort to explain disparities in the absence of individual racist discriminatory acts. That's how I understand it.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of nonstop yelling, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.